Chapter 2. Escape. When I awoke, I was aware of being somewhere warm and soft. There seemed to be a red glow nearby with thick black bars across it, and I could hear muffled voices around me. I felt hands helping me to sit up, and when I opened my eyes properly, I saw that I was in my own bed. The glow came from the fireplace, and there were candles burning. It was night. Bessie was standing beside me, looking anxious, and sitting in a chair by the bed was a sprightly, bright-eyed old man. I recognized him as Mr. Lloyd, the apothecary. "Do you know who I am, Jane?" he asked. "You are, Mr. Lloyd. You come when the servants are ill," I said. If Mrs. Reed herself or her own children ever fell sick, she called a proper doctor. "Well, I think she'll be all right after all," Mr. Lloyd smiled, holding my hand. "I'll come back tomorrow. In the meantime, make sure she stays warm." After seeing him out, Bessie returned. "Is there anything I can do for you, Miss Eyre?" she asked softly. "Would you like a bite to eat? Or some milk?" "No, thank you," I said, puzzled. Why was she being so nice to me? "Then I'll go to bed myself. It's after midnight," she said, "but you can call me if you need me." "Bessie, what happened?" I asked. "Am I ill?" "You fell into a faint with crying in the red room," said Bessie. "You'll be better soon." The next day I sat wrapped in a blanket by the fire, feeling miserable. The Reeds were out visiting friends in their carriage, and I should have been happy. Instead, I felt as if my spirit had been broken. Bessie came in with a pastry tart for me. She had put it on a beautiful little plate, decorated with flowers and birds. I had always loved this plate, but I had never been allowed to touch it. Now I could find no pleasure in it, and I had no appetite. Then Bessie asked if I wanted to read a book. I chose Gulliver's Travels, but when I opened it, the same feeling came over me. The stories and pictures I had loved meant nothing, and I put the book aside. At midday, Mr. Lloyd returned, as he had promised, and asked Bessie how I was. "She's doing very well, sir," she replied. "Then what's wrong, Jane? You've been crying." "I dare say she's upset because she couldn't go out in the carriage with the others," said Bessie. I was outraged at this suggestion. "No," I said indignantly. "I was only crying because I was sad." "Sad? But why?" "I suppose she's still sore from her fall," said Bessie. "I did not fall," I said. "I was knocked down. But that's not why I'm sad." "Why, then?" asked the apothecary. Just then, the bell rang, calling the servants to their lunch. I could tell Bessie wanted to stay and listen, but the rules were strict, and she must not be late. "Now then," said Mr. Lloyd when she had gone, "what do you have to be sad about?" I wanted to tell him everything, but I knew that telling tales was wrong. Finally, I said, I was locked in a room where there was a ghost. "Dear me," laughed Mr. Lloyd. "You don't believe in ghosts, do you, a sensible girl like you?" "And I have no mother or father," I went on. "But you have a kind aunt who cares for you and cousins to play with. And aren't you grateful to have a beautiful house like Gateshead Hall to live in?" "This is not my house," I said, "and they say I have less right to be here than a servant. I hate it here." "What nonsense," said Mr. Lloyd. "I can't believe you would want to leave such a splendid place." "I would," I said, deadly serious. "If I had anywhere else to go, I would leave the second." Now I could see that Mr. Lloyd believed me. His eyes narrowed, and he looked thoughtful. He said. "Would you go to school?" School? I had never been to school in my life and hardly knew what it meant. John Reed went to school for weeks at a time and said he hated it. But Bessie had told me that she had once worked for a family where the girls went to school, and they could paint and sew and sing and play the piano and read books in French. Books! If I went to school, I would be allowed to read all kinds of books, and it would mean leaving Gateshead Hall behind at last. Yes, I said. Yes, I would like to go to school. Well then, he said, I will speak to Mrs. Reed, and we'll see what we can do. After that day, I was kept even more separate from the others. I had to eat my meals alone, and Mrs. Reed told John, Eliza, and Georgiana not to speak to me. I spent more time with the servants than I did with the Reeds. Eventually, Bessie started to give me dusting and tidying jobs to do, to keep me busy. I waited to hear if I was going to school, but nothing happened. I waited through November and December. Christmas came and went. I was excluded from the parties and celebrations. I would wait in my room, listening to the sound of the piano, the clink of glasses, and the hum of conversation below. Sometimes Bessie would smuggle a cake or pastry from the feast and bring it to me upstairs. Then, one day in January, I was in the nursery, tidying up toys, when Bessie came in. "Miss Jane," she said, "haven't you finished that yet? Leave it be now and take off your pinafore. Have you brushed your hair this morning?" She bustled me over to the washstand, scrubbed my face, and quickly brushed my hair. "Mrs. Reed wants to see you in the drawing room," she said. "Hurry now." I knocked on the drawing room door and went in. Mrs. Reed was sitting in her usual chair, and standing opposite her was a huge, grim-faced man with bushy eyebrows wearing a black suit. "This is the little girl I wrote to you about," Mrs. Reed told him. "Come here," he said. "What is your name, child?" "Jane Eyre, sir." "And are you a good girl, Jane Eyre?" I wasn't sure what to say. I thought I was good, but I knew no one else in the house agreed. "The less said about that, the better," snorted Mrs. Reed. "In short, she's deceitful, dishonest, and wicked." "I'm sorry to hear it," said the man coldly. "Do you know where wicked people go, Jane, after they die?" "They go to hell?" I offered. "Indeed they do," he said. "Is that what you want to happen to you?" "No, sir," I said. "So what must you do to avoid it?" I was at a loss. I knew I couldn't try any harder to be good, so I said, "I must take care not to die, sir." This was not the right answer. The man sighed. "Do you read your Bible, Miss Eyre?" I could answer this. "Yes," I said happily. "I love Revelations and the book of Daniel and Genesis." "What about the Psalms?" "I don't like them," I said truthfully. "Oh, wicked child! I know a little boy younger than you who knows 6 Psalms by heart. When asked what he would prefer, a ginger cake or a psalm to learn, he says, 'Oh, the psalm, please. Angels sing psalms. I wish to be like a little angel.' He then gets 2 cakes as a reward for his goodness." I thought this boy sounded a lot more deceitful than me, but I said nothing. Mrs. Reed broke the silence. "Mr. Brocklehurst," she said, "I don't know if you'll be able to do anything with her, but you're welcome to try. You'll need to keep a close eye on her, as she's a cunning little thing." I burned with indignation and anger. She went on, "Jane needs to learn her humble place in this world. She is far too proud for her own good." "You need have no fears on that account, madam," replied Mr. Brocklehurst. "I have no patience for the sin of pride. I take great care to instill humility in all the girls at Lowood, and they have no ideas above their station. Why, just the other day, my daughter Augusta visited the school. Immediately afterwards, she remarked, 'Papa, how dull and plain the Lowood girls are, with their hair combed behind their ears and their homely pinafores. They stared at me as if they had never seen a silk gown before.'" "It sounds perfect for Miss Eyre," Mrs. Reed declared. "If it suits you, Mr. Brocklehurst, I will send her as soon as possible. She will stay full-time and spend the vacations there, too." When she returned from seeing Mr. Brocklehurst out, I stared at her with barely concealed fury. "Go back upstairs, Jane," she ordered. But I was not ready to go upstairs. She had lied about me and ruined my chances of making a new start at school. Now I knew I was going. I couldn't resist giving her a piece of my mind. I am not deceitful, I said. I am not dishonest. If I were, I would lie and say I liked you, and I do not. I hate you, and I hate your son and your stupid girls as well. They are the liars, not me. She stared at me with her icy eyes. Have you anything more to add? She asked coldly, as if she were speaking to an adult, not a child. Her sarcastic tone made me even more furious. I trembled from head to toe with rage as I shouted, Yes, I do! I am glad you are not my true relation. I will never call you aunt again as long as I live. I will never come and visit you. And if anyone ever asks me about you, I will tell them how cruel you were to me, and that the very thought of you makes me sick. How dare you say that? She gasped. I dare say it, I retorted, because it is the truth. I will always remember how you pushed me back into the red room, even though I cried and begged for mercy. And why were you punishing me? Because your son had knocked me down. You pretend to be respectable, but in private you're cruel and unfair, so you are the deceitful one, not me. What would Mr. Reed say if he could see the way you've treated me? I expected her to scream at me, but she didn't. When I mentioned her dead husband, I saw guilt and fear flash behind her eyes, and she turned away. Go upstairs, Jane, she said quietly. Bessie will help you pack your things. Bessie came into my room before dawn to wake me, but I was already dressed and ready to go. She tried to make me have some bread and milk, but I couldn't eat a thing. As I walked along the hallway and down the stairs of Gateshead Hall, I passed Mrs. Reed's room. I had no wish to go in and say goodbye to her. Bessie and I stepped out of the front door and into the darkness. I with my small case, Bessie with a lantern. It was dark and cold outside, and the lantern light reflected off the wet gravel as we crunched down the driveway to the road. At the lodge house, the porter's wife was up and lighting her fire for the day. She came out to chat to Bessie. I could already hear the sound of the public coach thundering towards us in the distance. Is she going by herself? The porter's wife asked. Yes, 50 miles, all on her own, said Bessie. The coach lights came into view, and the horses pulled to a halt. My suitcase was taken from me and hoisted onto the roof. I hugged Bessie tightly, and she kissed me on the cheek. Then the guard picked me up out of her arms and lifted me inside. The door slammed shut between us. Be sure to take good care of her, called Bessie as the horses were urged on. The wheels began to move, and alone and uncertain, I was carried away to my new life.